Hey, welcome into a bonus episode of Texans on Tap. I'm Brandon Strange. No Charlie today. I'm joined by Josh Jordan. You can follow Josh on X at Josh Jordan 975 and read his work daily on sportsmap.com. Josh, welcome in. Make sure I want to remind everybody who's watching this, please leave us a like on the video and subscribe to the channel as we ramp up to the 2024 Texans season. Josh, I wanted to have you on. You highlighted a clip on sportsmap.com this week. Shameless plug for sportsmap.com. Make sure you're following SportsMap on all your social platforms. Ocho and Unk, as he's being called now, but we know him as Shannon Sharpe. Shannon Sharpe and Ocho Cinco talked about on their show Nightcap. They were running down Bleacher Report's rankings for best NFL offenses. And so they've got the Texans ranked at number 12, which upon initial inspection, it didn't really stick out to them. But kind of as they were running down this list, all of a sudden, Shannon Sharpe started having more and more of a problem with where the Texans were ranked. So I'm gonna play this clip.
Hold on. The Texans with Diggs, with Nico Collins, Tank Dell, Dalton Schultz.
Yeah.
Are we sure? I mean, I'm trying to figure out what y'all like so much about the Cowboys. Okay, they got CD. Okay, what else?
So would you want to switch the Cowboys?
Ain't no way in hell I'm taking. Hold on, you think the Cowboys offense is better than the Texans?
No, they're not. No.
Hell no.
No, hell no.
With Diggs, Tank Dell, Nico Collins, Dalton Schultz, and CJ?
That's crazy.
Oh, hell no.
That's crazy work. The Packers are really, really good. Packers are really
hell
good.
No. Ain't no way the Texans got to be out of the top 10. Nah. I'm not so sure they're not better than the Bills. Are you just about? I mean, I'm trying to figure out the Bills did lose Stephon Diggs.
Yeah.
Keon Coleman is a rookie.
Yeah.
They lost the what's the other receiver that went to Jacksonville? Gabe Davis.
Gabe Davis.
Yeah. I like Kincaid. I like Dawson Knox.
Mm-hmm.
But are we sure the Bills offense is better than the Texans?
So what's your reaction and kind of where do you fall out on the case that Shannon Sharpe's making for where the Texans are at and this Bleacher Report ranking?
I completely agree with them. I mean, the Texans should be in the top 10. I don't think there's any question about that. And having Dallas in front of them, that makes no sense to me. Brandon Cooks, you remember him, Texans fans? Does that scare you very much on the Cowboys? And then they got CeeDee Lamb and the corpse of Zeke Elliott. There's not much on this Cowboys offense, man. I don't understand. I guess just because they're the Cowboys, they got up higher on the list, but no way. I take the Texans guys over them immediately. Shannon also says in the video he might take them over the Bengals. The Bengals are super talented with Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, but also Joe Mixon's gone. And then you have Joe Burrow has been banged up, where the Texans go 3 deep with Tank Dell, Nico, Stephon Diggs, and you still got Dalton Schultz and now Joe Mixon. I mean, that is a loaded offense. And CJ Stroud, I think the arrow is only pointing up for him. So I'm not on board with this. I'd have him in the top 10. I get the 49ers, the Chiefs, Lions, Dolphins, and Eagles maybe being in front of them. And the Ravens too, because Lamar Jackson he provides a lot to your offense. And they grabbed Derrick Henry, who I think will do better with Lamar Jackson there. I think he'll have a better year. But overall, Texans have to be in the top 10 here. I would have them actually at like 7, I think, right behind the Ravens.
Yeah, I mean, like, I will. I've said since the draft, I think the Texans are a top 10 team, especially if you're just talking about offense, because obviously there's some question marks on defense, especially in that secondary. But I think where they're at right now, I think puts them as a top 10 team, especially if you're talking about just offense with the weapons that Shannon Sharpe names. I think it becomes abundantly clear when you actually kind of are talking it through. And I think, probably that's the key is you have to actually kind of like assign value based on the players versus the the strength of the brand name. You know what I mean? And I know that the Texans brand name's kind of been drugged through the mud. I think an example of this and kind of just this drive-through analysis that we're seeing is another example, something that just came out a few days ago, which was a few days prior to this, Michael Robinson and Maurice Jones-Drew on NFL Network. They're talking about they're doing, reactions to the schedule breakdown. And so they're going through all the teams and they're projecting out their schedules. They're predicting out win losses on their schedule. They get to the Texans, and this was a really strange one to kind of analyze here. Part of it because I think the analysis gets broken down between two guys. So it's half Michael Robinson, half MJD that are breaking this down. But when it gets to the latter half and MJD is giving his prediction here, this is really interesting. Let me play this and get your reaction to it.
Okay, here we go. The Cowboys, I got a W because they are the best team in Texas. Here, the Tennessee Titans. Brian Callahan, I love you, Jack, but you guys going to take an L there. They're going to lose. Jacksonville's going to beat them in Houston. It's weird. They'll take a loss to Miami. We're going to lose here. We're going to lose here. And we're going to split, or we'll sweep. We'll lose to the Titans. We'll get it.
You got them 8-9. I had them 9-8.
I was going to go there, but I just think, again, it's kind of like a little bit too much hype right now for them.
He thinks they're going to lose the last 5 games of the season, and have them finish under 500. I mean, this definitely aligns more with Colin Cowherd's opinion or what his early projection was of the Texans, more so than what it aligns with what Shannon Sharp says here. Where do you fall out on this?
I just don't see them dropping 5 straight games to end the season unless there's some kind of injury. If everybody's playing that we expect, and of course guys will be injured throughout the course of the season. It's football, but unless it's a major injury, I don't see them losing 5 straight. I do get it. We've talked about this in our we did a schedule reaction video that they are going to have to make some hay early in the season because of those tough games against KC and the Ravens late in the year, where they have 3 games in 11 days or something like that. Ridiculous. And they have to get all the way to week 14 for their first off week, so they'll be pretty banged up. I think the kicker for me is them losing the final game of the season to the Titans.
Thank you.
That's where I'm like, what are we talking? I mean, they beat the Titans with Case Keenum last year. Hopefully they're going to get better. They made some additions, but I think the Texans are better too. I just don't see CJ Stroud letting them lose that game, especially if making the playoffs is on the line.
Well, especially if you're going to give them credit for going into Dallas and beating Dallas. Yeah. And again, I know this is kind of wonky because it's between 2 people, but MJD said this, he's the same one making the prediction on this side of the board. So he's going to give them credit to go into Dallas on Monday Night Football and win, but then they're going to go to Tennessee in the last game of the season and drop that game. How does that make any sense at all?
He's just trying to, they'll split for the season. You heard him give a shout out to one of the coaches earlier in the video. So perhaps it's, and you notice he gave his Jaguars a win against the Texans as well. So sometimes you have some personal feelings that get in here. But I will say this, he is not in alignment with Vegas. We have the new odds from Vegas. They have the point spreads for every single game on the Texans schedule now, and they have the win total. The Texans are set by Vegas for 9.5 wins. We did our schedule breakdown with Charlie about a week ago. I was between 9 and 10 and pushed. I kind of went with 10. So I'm not surprised that Vegas is in that same ballpark. But if you look at these games, he talks about, they'll beat Dallas. Well, Dallas is actually favored by 3 in that game. And then when they go to the Texans are actually favored against Miami by 2.5 points because it's a home game. And then the Texans are also favored on the road against the Titans by 3 points. So obviously every line's not going to go the way Vegas predicts it's going to go.
Right.
But I think he's a little off base here that they lose that many games at the end of the season, especially after you go through Miami, Kansas City, and Baltimore. Playing Tennessee would probably feel like playing a college team after that gauntlet. So I just don't see it happening. But I think it is interesting that they are going to be around 500, but are they going to be a game or 2 over it or maybe a game below it in that area? It's going to be close. So I was thinking, maybe 9 and 8 or something like that could be a possibility for the Texans, but who knows? Maybe they'll win one more game. But I don't think they're going to backslide from last year, even though the schedule's more difficult. I think they upgraded the roster to where that won't happen. My biggest concern, though, is Nico Collins, Tank. Those guys got to stay healthy.
Sure.
Stephon Diggs, is he gonna look like he looked like for the Bills in the first half of the season as opposed to the second half of the season? Yeah. And then my biggest thing is Stingley at corner. Letting Steven Nelson go, and we know Stingley's injury history. He's got to stay healthy, or you don't have a whole lot at corner if he's not available.
No, it's true. But I guess Nelson's not going to come back after his milk dud comments here. But yeah. I just think that I don't think it's impossible that they drop 5 a row at the end of the season, but I think they only do that if something has gone terribly wrong. And I don't think it's just if you don't have Stingley. I think it's something has gone wrong from an offensive standpoint, in which maybe they're in the same situation. They'd have to be in the same situation, I think, that they were in last year, where basically CJ's only got one guy to throw to. But even in that scenario, they were able to pull out games. You talked about the Titans game being able to win even with Case Keenum at the helm. That's why I think that I call shenanigans on that, because I don't have any problem if you think, hey, Miami's a good team. You think Miami's going to beat them? Fine. You think KC and Baltimore beats them? Fine. That no one's going to call you crazy for putting L's on those games. But thinking that you're going to lose, the Texans are going to lose the last game of the season, especially if they need it, especially if they're in the playoff hunt, and you don't think they can't go to Tennessee and pick up a victory on the road there, even with a limited staff? I just don't see that. Again, MJD had a W on that and then changed it at the very last minute and put an L on it. These guys are just pulling this out of their backside. I mean, when really and truly, and look, Vegas, you have to be careful about the lines because it's meant to get you to bet. Sure. The lines are there to incentivize action, but they're also usually pretty close to what reality is on the aggregate, like on the overall, and that's why Vegas is, that's why they make their money, is because they have the sharps setting the lines there. But yeah, I agree. Look, if all it takes is the Texans winning one or two of these big games before all of a sudden the schedule looks a lot more realistic to hit 11 or 12 games. Let's also remember too, last season, no one predicted the Texans to win 10 games. Not anyone who was serious about it and not doing like something tongue in cheek. No one predicted 10 wins legitimately.
No. And if we look at the beginning of the schedule, we talk about them losing a lot at the end of the schedule. Well, they could also win a lot. They are favored in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Their first 6 games of the season, which includes Buffalo, the Texans are favored. So the first game they're not favored is week 7 at Green Bay. And when we're looking at, the odds for the division and whatnot, I mean, the Texans, they're predicted to win the division according to Vegas. They're plus 105. Whereas the Titans are plus 800. They have the worst odds to win the division. So I don't think they're going to lose that game. Also in Vegas, the Texans are more likely to make the playoffs than to miss it. So that's also working in their favor. Their Super Bowl odds, they're plus 1,600. They're kind of hovering around the top 10 in Super Bowl odds, depending on what sports book you're looking at. So,
but doesn't that sound more realistic? Like, doesn't that sound like the top 10? I think like just with your eyes, what they had last season, what they got this season. Again, you have to account for injuries, but that just sounds right. They sound like a top 10 team on paper. And so like putting them in 8 and 9, like I just don't see that happening. And look, again, like if you look at like how they're assigning these wins and losses, how does it make any sense for you to go into Dallas, but then drop one in Jacksonville? Like you're going to win on Monday Night Football in Dallas, but then you lose at Jacksonville. And hey, maybe they do lose in Jacksonville. Like maybe that's one they do lose, but they're going to, the biggest one is the red flag at the end of the season. A loss at Tennessee makes 0 sense to me.
And I'm just going to put this out there. I don't really think the Jags are that good. I'm not super impressed with what I've seen from Trevor Lawrence. And
right.
So I don't worry about the Jags that much, if I'm being honest here. And the other thing is all the all the cohesion, having Bobby Slowick back and having your quarterback coach back, your defensive coordinator stayed, D'Amico's still here. You got CJ coming back with Tank Dell and Nico that already know the offense, and Dalton Schultz, and your offensive line is intact. I mean, even Mechie is a guy that is familiar with the system, who maybe he could take a step forward this year. Robert Woods is still on the offense. Yeah. I don't see, usually you're going to have turnover where you don't have a coordinator, or you don't have this or that, or you're working in a new rookie quarterback. Texans have young talent, and they're all returning with the same offensive system, the same play callers. I like it. I wouldn't be surprised, and I said it in our last video, maybe week 1 against the Colts. I just find like week 1 is such a coin flip no matter what. It's kind of like it's similar to a preseason game, right? Because it's your first real action, and you're trying to correct stuff. And at the end of the day, it's a coin flip if you're going to start the season 1-0 or 0-1. And I think that Anthony Richardson, maybe they can scheme him up to use his legs and somehow beat the Texans. That wouldn't surprise me. But I don't think it's going to be Will Levis unless he takes a big leap forward. So I like the Texans. And that Bleacher Report thing that we talked about, I think they should be in the top 10 offenses. I think they're a top 10 team in the NFL. And you won't chase me off that. I know people are worried about expectations or a sophomore slump, or, they're going to catch up to the Texans. They've seen tape of CJ Stroud. Well, the Browns, how did they do scheming for the Texans and CJ Stroud in the playoffs with their number one defense? Yeah. They didn't have any answers. So why all of a sudden and that's all you're focusing on there is CJ and that Texans offense, and they couldn't get it done. I don't see how week to week the NFL is going to have any better answers with likely a worse defense than the Browns.
Yeah, and if you're going to take credit away from the Texans because they're like, Joe Flacco gave it away twice. He made 2 really ill-advised throws. Well, they were leading at halftime before all that happened anyway. So they were still pacing ahead, and they were at least keeping up. It's not that Jacksonville scares me by any means, Josh. I think what I'm trying to account for is the streakiness of Trevor Lawrence. And I think that game he'll probably take a little bit more pride in because he's going up against CJ. There's a little bit of that rivalry there of top drafted quarterbacks. And I think, it's not out of the realm of possibility that maybe Trevor Lawrence puts together a good game, especially against the Texans secondary, who you're at week 13 by that point. Who knows, what your secondary looks like by that week. So that's all I'm saying is I'm saying it's not crazy to think that maybe the Texans go in there and drop that game, but
they're a 1-point underdog currently. Jacksonville's +1 favored at home for that game. But that also tells you they don't respect Jacksonville that much because they're only giving them the 1 point in a home game.
Right. Which usually a 3-point swing for home field advantage. So I'm just saying it's not crazy to think that, but I think it is compared to, you think they're going to be able to rise up to the occasion of going into Dallas for a game that, hey, like it's really nothing more than pride. It's not about
football though too,
Yeah. Yeah. And so I think like you're feeling they can rise up to that game, but they can't beat Trevor Lawrence at home, and they can't go into Tennessee and win at the final game of the season, which will probably have major playoff implications, especially if you're backsliding the next 4 games. Even if we concede the 4 games before that, or at least the 3 games before that, where, Miami, KC, and Baltimore. Oh, okay. That's not the craziest thing, but I just think, the playoff implications there in the last game of the season, and you can't give them credit to win in Tennessee. I think that's bonkers. I don't buy into that at all.
I don't either. And I mean, these guys are just like you said, they're just kind of throwing out there just, hey, this is kind of my first thought of looking at this, what could happen. So I'm not putting too much in it, but if they're just super beat up because of those 3 games in 10 or 11 days, maybe they are beat up from, Miami, KC, Baltimore, which, I mean, those are some tough defenses there. So I get it. So maybe if they're so nicked up, they go into Tennessee and aren't able to pull it out, maybe you could make that argument. But when you make these predictions, you're not supposed to predict for injuries. You're not supposed to be like, well, I think Stroud's going to miss this many games. This is predictions for what you think is going to happen, considering who's on the team, because you never really know with injuries how that's going to go throughout the course of the season.
No, it's for sure, but I think it's hard to ignore that, especially when you're making when you're playing, 13 weeks in a row. The bye week doesn't fall until week 14 for the Texans. So it's hard not to think that, maybe weeks 11, 12, and 13, maybe they're not going to be banged up. That does make sense. But if you do account for it, those should be where your losses are. In the back end on the other side of the bye, after you've healed up a little bit, you'd think that's where your W's are going to come from. Instead, they got the Texans, if you go by MJD and Michael Robinson here, they have the Texans losing every game after the bye. To me, that just doesn't make intellectual sense.
I don't see that happening either. And you also have to keep in mind, like KC and Baltimore are having to play on short weeks because just like the Texans are, because of these. I don't know why they had these guys playing on a Wednesday on Christmas Day. No. I mean, tell me they don't care about player safety. Yeah. I mean, come on, man. Yeah. That's crazy. But to be fair, they're going to be dinged up too, not just the Texans.
No, for sure. I just think, if as we're kind of looking at it, we think of like where are the weaknesses at for the Texans? You've already talked about the secondary and how reliant they are upon Stingley being healthy, and hopefully he will be healthy again. But even with Stingley healthy last year and Steven Nelson, that secondary had holes in it. They had real problems at safety and containing last year, especially towards
the concern too.
Yeah.
Sheldon Rankins, they didn't really replace him. They traded away Malik Collins. I know they brought in some other guys, but it's kind of an unknown.
Yeah.
So, I'm with you. Kind of the corner, it's a little thin with depth, and D tackle, we're not sure yet.
Yeah, absolutely. But even that in the mix, I still think this is easily a top 10 team. I think it's easily, I should say easily. I think it is definitely a top 10 team. I think it is easily a top 10 offense, because if I'm not having to account for what the secondary may or may not do, and I'm just looking at on paper of what CJ Stroud has to throw to and the upgraded running game, I will definitely take that. I don't think that there are 12 teams that are better than them on offense, as Bleacher Report predicted. So I think that's complete garbage. I'm 100% in Shannon Sharp's camp of that's almost offensively disrespectful towards the Texans as far as what they have on paper. That's almost completely ignoring what CJ Stroud did last year and the upgrade on the offense and the upgrades, and then the retention of guys, bringing back guys like Dalton Schultz on the team, Noah Brown.
Yeah. And I would like to just point out finally, before we get out of here, a lot of these are going to be close games, according to Vegas.
Hopefully.
The biggest point spread on the schedule is the Texans are 4.5 point dogs against the Chiefs. And then they're also 4.5 point favorites against the Patriots. But outside of that, all the spreads are lower than that. So you remember the Texans, they won a lot of close games last year. Hopefully that's something that carries over into this year, because it looks like they're going to be playing in a lot of close games based on these point spreads.
It does. And when you're talking about close games and having to score late, we saw CJ Stroud be able to pull that off multiple times last season. That's what you are betting on when you have a guy like CJ Stroud, is his ability to be able to close the deal late in games, putting the ball in his hand and being able to trust him to go out and get that final score for you, a game-winning drive. We've seen him do it. So I'm going to bet on that guy until he shows me it's, that he can't do it otherwise. So,
and Amy Fairbairn, you know how those late games often come down to a field goal. They paid him in the offseason, so he needs to go earn that money.
He does, but you saw what it looked like when he wasn't around, and I prefer what it looks like when he is here. He's not perfect, but he's better than a lot of options that are out there for you. It's a gigantic unknown, and I'll take the devil I know versus the devil I don't. So we'll call it a day there. Josh, appreciate you jumping on with me and reacting to some of this. Like I said, the genesis of this was seeing some of that content that you're putting out on sportsmap.com. Want to encourage everyone, if you're not doing so already, go read Josh's stuff daily on sportsmap.com. Charlie Polillo contributes weekly on sportsmap.com. Ken Hoffman is writing for sportsmap.com. Some good stuff happening on sportsmap.com. Make sure you're reading the website. Make sure you're following everywhere on social where Sports Map's at. Wherever you're on social, Sports Map's out there as well. And make sure you're subscribed to this channel so you see Texans on tap as we ramp up to the 2024 season. We will have Charlie Palillo included once we get those podcasts restarted full time. For Josh, I'm Brandon. Have a great day. Go Texans.